Not one dominant headline all across the board, although I do think that the failures of the Biden regime in a number of capacities deserve a whole lot more attention, something we'll certainly be doing here. And on the issue of crime, something that I feel is a reality in New York that is inescapable right now, and I'm sure it's true in other places, as we've discussed, let's call it last roughly 12 months, in pretty much every major American city. There were a couple of cities, Clay, where I said I hadn't pulled the numbers, the data, and we still should do that. I'm wondering what's happened in Tampa, what's happened in Miami, but every other major city I can think of has been going through a rough time, and we know why this is. There was a decision made, largely pushed by the political pressure of the BLM movement, to start being a whole lot more permissive, not only about violent crime, shorter sentences, bail reform laws, things of that nature, but just day-to-day crime. I mean, shoplifting has been almost legalized in some major American cities with predictably disastrous consequences, along with turnstile jumping and public urination. All these are lessons that were learned in major cities in the 80s and the 90s, and Democrats decided, you know what, let's just try it again. Let's just see what happens when we abandon law and order in the name of social justice. Criminal justice gets sidelined for social justice. And the mayor of New York, who I have been a skeptic of from the beginning and find deeply disappointing a few months in, Eric Adams, says that it is actually, they're going to try this, Clay. They're just going to see what will fly. They're going to try all kinds of stuff. Here he is telling everybody that it is Republicans who are guilty of defunding the police or wanting to because they won't pass Build Back Better.
You've heard the narrative beforehand about defunding the police. Let me tell you what the defunders of police are. Those are those who did not vote on the Build Back Better bill. Money was in that bill for police officers. We have 2,400 ATF agents in our country. Only 80 are in New York. We need to double that amount. We need to go after the ghost guns. We need to put a head to ATF in place, put in place a real gun tracing program, and then we have to be preventive. Many of these generational social problems have become the pipeline to violence, and the only thing that is beating that pipeline is the pipeline of guns that are coming in our inner cities.
This is all politics. This is not actually law enforcement expertise speaking in any capacity, Clay. We could even just look at the recent shooting on the New York City subway, which not a lot of
disappeared from the news almost immediately.
Not a lot of coverage of a mass casualty terror attack on the New York City subway system. But a few days ago, I also tried to find the victims to see who was targeted by this. I can only find two. They still haven't released the identities of the victims of that attack, at least that I've been able to find, which I think is noteworthy. But Clay, he bought his firearm legally. So yeah. What exactly is Eric Adams? Put aside how stupid the Build Back Better plan is in general. How would that have actually affected crime in the city over the last 6 months? How would it have affected the incident last week? The answer is not at all. ATF agents wouldn't have done a damn thing.
We're going back in time. And for those of us who remember a high crime New York City, a high crime, basically every city in America, there was a fear that things were going to get worse in the 1990s. You remember this. And the one thing that Joe Biden might have gotten right in his entire career was the 1994 crime bill, which really legitimately brought back down crime. And we continued to ride the legitimacy of that bill, which was passed. Democrats and Republicans said crime is a disgrace. Let's solve it. And this is important. Being concerned about people being in prison for too long is a luxury of a low crime era. And what happened time after time after time was people said, oh, we're punishing criminals too much. And as all the DAs started to leak, this guy been arrested, the one who shot on the subway, 12 times, Buck, 9 times in New York and 3 times in New Jersey. And I understand that the 3 strikes and you're out crime bill, which basically said, hey, you commit 3 felonies, you're gone. There were people who got caught up in that and ended up getting draconian sentences as a result. But as a group, We put people who were violent behind bars, and crime came down for the rest of us. And now those same people back out on the streets, not suffering any sort of significant consequences for their criminal behavior, and all of us are bearing the price.
And I'm just going to tell everybody this, and I know not everyone's going to like to hear it, but it's true. Trump administration got caught up in some of this stuff. We're going to be honest about this. Let's be honest about this. The Trump administration was pushing the First Step Act, the Trump administration after BLM. Now, when I say caught up in some of this, maybe they were 5% or 10% as caught up as the 90 or 95% of this was Democrat policies and ideas. But this became fashionable on the right as well for a while. Not just when I say Trump administration, I mean that more generally also with the GOP, the Trump White House, but also a lot of people in the GOP were talking about criminal justice reform. This became fashionable for a while. And it was always, we're locking up too many people for nonviolent drug offenses. That's not really the case when you look at what the drug offenses actually usually involve. Drug offenses are often easy to prove. And so federal prosecutors will say, well, we'll get you on the drugs. We're not even going to go after the weapons possession. We're not even going to go after the violent gang assault or whatever the other charges may be. So all you see for an individual are possession of, X ounces of fill in the blank with illegal drug. We weren't actually locking up a whole lot of people for decades for just having a bag of marijuana. And I think that started to become the perception that was pushed by a lot of people to get. I mean, Clay, why else do we have all these? We had all these criminal justice reform laws going into effect 2018, 2019, 2020. And then the BLM movement came about, the undermining of police as racist. I think we have to take stock and look at how this whole thing happened. Yeah, the progressive prosecutors are out of their minds, but obviously, and they have to be dealt with first, but there were some Republicans that were a little off on this one. I'm just going to say it, a little off.
Well, and again, the consequences of, I think you have to combine this with social media, Buck, because what happens is there's one social media video that goes viral, and this is frequent for many different issues. But certainly as it pertains to George Floyd, that video, instead of people saying, okay, let's find out whether or not these police officers are responsible for committing a crime and prosecute them as occurred, immediately the idea became we have to destroy the entire policing system, and all police are awful and not worthy of our respect. And that is what the argument became. I mean, I'm sitting here right now doing the show, Buck, in my Outkick Fund the Police t-shirt. It says Fund the Police. That actually became a slogan because defund the police, which is fundamentally the dumbest slogan in the history of modern American politics, became what Democrats wanted to run on. And there were so many people who were afraid of being called racist in the wake of the George Floyd tape that they weren't willing to say, hey, let's pause here. Do we really need to tear down the entire criminal justice system in an effort to try and respond to this video?
Here's former New York City Police Commissioner Bill Bratton, famous for being a part of the bringing crime down movement here in the city of New York. Here he is.
The scales right now are tipped very heavily in favor of the reforms of the progressive left. Well-intended, some needed, but tipped too far. And what we have as a result is this growing fear of crime, this growing actual amount of crime, as evidenced in almost every major American city.
That's exactly what happened. It just went too far toward the left. And what you see now is the areas of real challenge and the areas of real problems in America from a policy perspective. Wide open border, way too much spending, obviously way too much COVID restriction from my perspective as well, but also permissiveness toward crime and criminality. These are maladies of the left. These are things that you can trace directly to the ideology of one major political party in this country. And look, I try to hold everybody accountable for their decisions, and that's why I'll say some Republicans I think were a little too favorable toward this. But it's a 90-10 proposition. This is 90% Democrats' responsibility and maybe 5 or 10% Republicans pushing for the madness that we're suffering through in major cities right now.
The positive is, Buck, people forgot, but we know how to fix this. And it's a matter of making those fixes happen. That's what the 90s were about, right? Fixing many of these social ills. Now, is there the political wherewithal to actually fix them? That's why we need to have a landslide in November, because that will change. It'll crystallize a lot of Democrats into recognizing how much they overreached.
Yeah, it would be good if we could get to a place where somehow, I see this all the time on social media, Clay, where there's a video of police officers that are trying to tell someone, you can't block traffic, or what you're doing is illegal. And there's this attitude of, oh, well, I'm just not getting arrested today.
Yeah.
And then the cop will say, you're under arrest. And they say, no, sorry. Until people understand that that's actually in itself, that is the problem, right? If you think you can just wrestle with cops because you don't feel like getting arrested today, and some portion of the public goes along with you and says, yeah, if you don't feel like getting arrested, no problem. Go for it. See if you can escape. We are going to have lawlessness in a way that really makes people unsafe and makes our society miserable.
Every single violent police encounter, virtually every single one of them, would not exist if the initial person just complied with police officer requests. Period. Comply. I say that to my kids all the time. Your dad is an attorney. If your constitutional rights are violated, you get an opportunity, thankfully, in this country to defend yourself against any way that you might have been mistreated. But if you don't comply with the police officer, things get worse in a hurry. I don't know why every parent doesn't have this conversation with their kids.
It is remarkable that if you told somebody, hey, I want to have a module in school, just a module, not even a full class, where we teach kids about, if you have to have an interaction with police, here's how to go about it safely.
Yes.
Know your rights. Here are your rights. Here's what they can do. Here's what they can't do. That is crazy totalitarianism. But teaching kids about pansexualism and 37 different genders is science and is necessary. This is the modern left for you folks. This is